16 or so, and has been working in Guatemala with Mary Purvis, who is the missionary there. And like I say, she's been the key God's used to put this thing together to carry us to Guatemala. So that being said,
All right,
the
thank
floor
you.
is yours.
Thank you. Okay, so my interest in Guatemala started in 1986 when I adopted my first son from Guatemala. I'm single and I've never been married, and I've adopted and raised 3 children. First 2 of them were from Guatemala. And as often as I could afford to, I took them back to their birth country to get to know Guatemala. So I've been there a lot over the years. But while living in Fairhope, about maybe 15 years ago, I met Mary Purvis, who lived in Fairhope. She also was very interested in Guatemala. So we shared that interest and we got to be friends, and then all of a sudden, she decided she was moving to Guatemala to be a full-time missionary.
Wow.
So she went down all by herself and is a missionary there all by herself. She has staff that work with her that are Guatemalan. She's the only American in the town. And she has an incredible program going. So after she'd been there a year or so, I asked her if she wanted me to try to get together some doctors, since I was a nurse, and bring a medical mission team. And so for the last 5 years, I've gone once a year with the medical mission team. In the first few of those years, I was still working full-time as a nurse. But a year and a half ago, I retired. So last year and then this past fall, I was able to stay 2 months each time and work with her and just do a lot of follow-up with our patients from the clinic. And it was just one of these God things that I got to hear about this ministry from Ken at Perspectives. I went to Perspectives as an alumni just because I love it. I wanted to just meet the people there. And Ken spoke, and as I talk to you about what we do in Guatemala, you'll see that this ministry is exactly what they need. God just set that up. It's miraculous. It's also miraculous how he set it up for Mary Purvis to be in town when we could come together and meet with Jan and Ken. Okay, so Guatemala is in Central America, next country after Mexico. Beautiful, beautiful mountainous country. There's the volcano, one of the many volcanoes. They've got some active volcanoes right now. And it's just beautiful. We get picked up at the airport by Mary Purvis's driver, and we drive 4 hours up into the mountains. It's 4 hours out of the capital. And it's an interesting drive, a little thrilling. Some people find it a little scary, but I think it's just beautiful. And as Mary Purvis has taught me, the safest place to be is in the center of God's will.
Absolutely.
It's not safe. Everybody asks me, is it safe? Well, no, it's not safe. Going around the curves on the mountains or even, life in Guatemala. But when you're doing God's will, you're safe.
That's right.
This is the city where Mary Purvis lives, and it's called Ravaged. It's just a very small city or a large town, something like that. That's the market square, so you can get an idea of what it looks like there. And this is the little hotel where the group will stay, and it is bare bones basic, let me tell you. You better be ready to rough it a little bit. It's not anything compared to the conditions the people we work with live in. This is luxury to them, but to us it's a little bit rustic. This is the dining room in the hotel. We can eat there or at several restaurants that are all kind of comparable to that. This is the beds where you get to sleep. This is the shower that has the little apparatus and the electrical wires into the shower.
Yeah.
And that little canister heats the water as it comes through. And if you forget when you're washing your hair and you touch, you get a thrill. But it's never killed me.
Wow.
Very basic. I just like to disclose this because, some people may think that it's going to be a little nicer than that. But We live pretty rustic. This is Mary Purvis, the missionary. She was raised a missionary kid in Mexico. She was raised just like a little Mexican, walking barefoot in the streets in a village. And she knows now that God was preparing her then for this ministry. That was her childhood. And you can see the people that we work with. These are the Mayan Indian people in Guatemala. Spanish is the language, the national language in Guatemala, but I think it's like 7% of the population don't even speak it. And a big percentage of the population, it's their second language. Spanish is not their first language. There are 21 Mayan dialects in Guatemala. And these people are Achi Mayan Indians. They speak Achi. There are 85,000 people that speak Achi. That's not very many. It's a very small language. And some of the Bible is translated into Achi, but nowadays few of them can read it. Well, first, these people of this age are illiterate, period. But then the younger children that are going to school in Spanish are even losing their Achi. But to speak with the older people, you need it. In 1982, there were some, I think, Guatemalan government-led massacres of the Mayan Indian people. There was a UN Truth Commission that ruled that it was genocide of the Mayan people in the 1980s in Guatemala. And Jan and Ken have here a video that'll tell you about the massacres. It works, doesn't it? It doesn't work? Oh boy, I'll get you one then. We'll figure it out.
Thank you.
Anyway, there's a PBS special documentary from like 15 years ago telling about the massacres. And so there was a village up in the mountains. This is me and my friends hiking up to that village in the mountains, and I'll never hike there again because I barely survived it. But I wanted to see where it all started. Rio Negro was up in these mountains, and it's a whole big political thing that I can't even comprehend or get into, but they wanted to build a dam to harness electrical power, and they had to flood these people's villages. And the people were opposed to that, therefore they needed to be eliminated. That's sort of my shortened version. And so there were 2 or 3 massacres within a month or two, killing off most all the people in Rio Negro. Some were going to market, some were out in their fields, some survived. A whole lot did not survive, some survived. So the people that Mary Purvis works with are the survivors of the Rio Negro massacre. Later, first the ones that survived ran to the mountains, and some went to refugee camps in Mexico. But a lot of them survived hiding in the mountains. And for a couple of years, or several years, I'm not sure how many, then the government made a peace accord with the Mayan Indian. I guess they had their dam done by then, so they made peace with the Indian people. And they created a resettlement village. Since Rio Negro village actually now doesn't exist because it's underwater because of the dam. So they made a resettlement village where 150 families were settled. And it's right on the edge of, well, now I can't get back there. It's right on the edge of this town. This is Rabina. It's the big town. But the resettlement village is right on the edge. So they were rural people living in this kind of a setting. And then they were moved to these shacks that the government built for them in their resettlement village. I was down there adopting one of my children at the time that they created this resettlement village, and I remember the documentary in Spanish on the local stations telling about the beautiful village that they had created to resettle the displaced Mayan people. And of course, that was in the middle 80s or early 90s, and they were nicer back then, but they aren't very nice right now. This is how they cook with firewood. This is one of the doctors I took down examining a patient. She doesn't speak Spanish. The doctor spoke some Spanish, the patient didn't. So her little grandson is translating the Achi so that we could interpret for her. This is the nurse I took with me. Pat turned 80 while we were there that year. That was 5 years ago. And she could run circles around me and the missionary. She just did great. The little boy that she's hugging there, he loved her. She was his size. She's a little tiny lady and he just loved her. It's the most precious little boy you can ever imagine. Mary Purvis, the missionary, raised him for 4 years. And this is Rudy. He was murdered, shot in the head 5 times. So that's the biggest trauma that Mary has ever had since she was down there. He was not murdered at her house. He had wanted to go back and stay with his stepmother in the capital, and Mary had let him, and after being there 1 month, he was murdered in the capital. So Mary mentioned that the missionary and I came here to find out, how could we work with this ministry, and we did find that out, but also Mary disclosed about Rudy and the grief, and she had raised him for 4 years, but really for 6 years he had lived with like Mike Meganson and Sally Meganson in Fairhope. I don't know if any of you know him, but he lived a year with them in Costa Rica when they were down there as missionaries. So anyway, there's a lot of people that love little Rudy, and Mary told about that trauma, and Ken was seated at the head of the table, and Mary was over here, and Ken just stood up and said, "I'll move." And Jan moved and sat down there next to Mary and said, "Would you like to pray?" And so Mary has sent me at least 2 or 3 messages since she's been back to Guatemala of how much that helped. Every year they celebrated the date that Rudy came to live with Mary. It was like a second birthday or something, and they celebrated it every year. And this year she celebrated it at the cemetery. And she sent me a picture of his grave with the flowers, and she said she can't begin to tell how much Jan's prayer had helped her, because she didn't cry all day long. She said she cried briefly at the cemetery because the taxi driver had to stop along the way and said, "I need to run in the store." When they got there, she didn't think about why he had done that. When they got there, he brought out a little candle and lit it and put a cup of water on the headstone for Rudy to have some water. And she said she had to cry just a little bit over that, but it had helped her so much. It was so healing to her. So she is very invested in having this group come and work with the people. All the people, the Mayan people that we work with, desperately need healing. These are people who, the older people, oh, that's just a cute picture. The older people, they lost their husbands or wives in the massacres, and their children in the massacres. And some of the younger people in their late 30s, they survived the massacre. They're survivors, child survivors. So they went through a massacre when they were children. Some were taken to be slaves for some years. Anybody you talk to in the resettlement village, they don't just start talking about it right away, but if you scratch the surface at all, they tell you who died, who they lost. And it's somebody close, and it's probably more than one. And the massacres were perpetrated by villagers from the next village. By means of the government required the villagers to do that. They forced them to do it. But still, your neighbors murdered your family, So there's so much going on with, they just have a lot that they need to forgive. And then there are things that are very hard to forgive. So all the people that we work with there are in desperate need of the services of a healing team. And I am so excited that God has just miraculously put this plan in place. And I think it's one of the, I've been going down with medical teams and we've taken care of some ear infections and, quite a bit of diabetes and things like that. But that's not the root of the problem. And this is going to get to what they really need.
Amen.
This is just showing one of the teams I took. And the two Guatemalan girls on the right there in front are our interpreters. Then the one with the whale on her shirt, she is Mary's assistant, and she's got some training, and she's basically a missionary too. And she works with Mary, but also interprets. And then the other girl we bring from the capital, from Guatemala City, out to be our interpreter too. This is a home visit in one of their homes. We're just visiting in the home, and that's what it looks like in there. That's what your little patients look like. This is in another home, a little bit better. That lady asked the doctor if he would pray for her, and so he prayed. This is a little boy I love. I met him 5 years ago, and he's a troubled little boy, and they have such strange ideas of discipline down there that his dad, he's a handful. He's a very lively little boy. But his dad tied him on a rope in the front yard and left him out there. And he screamed and screamed, "I'm not afraid to die. I'm not afraid to die." These are the things even the children live with. And it's generational. These are people who have generational issues from the massacre, and now this little boy wasn't there for the massacre, but he's living it. This is something like you perspective people will appreciate that. So their heart language is Achi, not Spanish. And these little boys were old little troublemakers. We were waiting to see the doctors in clinic, and that takes a long time. It's a long process. So those little boys were running around causing a lot of commotion. So I just stopped and went out and gathered the little boys and said, "I want to tell y'all a story." And I had met this man earlier and found out he's an Achi teacher in the local school, that they're trying to teach them their native Achi. So I asked him, "Would you listen to my story and then retell it in Achi?" So I told the story of Jesus calming the storm and the waves. And the little boys listened to me pretty well. And then he told it in Achi, and the little boys went and listened. Totally different. It just showed to me how different it is when you're teaching in their heart language. It was beautiful. Just put this in there. That's my friend Bernarda. She's even been in my house in Fairhope. She's the head cook at the feeding program, and I wanted you to see the size of the people. They aren't all as tiny as Bernarda, but they're pretty close. I'm a giant. They do think I'm a giant. They carry their babies on their back. Oh, that's little Martine. He came to clinic because he's been having spells. He was having these spells. And I didn't have a doctor that year. Well, I had a nurse practitioner and then me. So I'm examining Martine, and I'm like, well, I guess he needs an EEG if he's having these spells. I don't know what in the world, they don't have EEGs in that town, what in the world am I going to do for this child? So I got to talking to him a little more, and he had seen a snake that reared up and tried to strike at him, but didn't actually strike, but it scared him to death. That child was scared to death. I saw him for about a week, but he never smiled. And his spells were panic attacks. I knew they didn't, when he described them, they didn't sound quite like real seizures. And anyway, then a week later, one of our doctors who went with me, who's Colombian, came, and he was able to speak to Martine and talk to him, about calming measures and everything. And this is Martine after he got to see the doctor. And I mean, he walked around serious for a week. He was scared to death. And then he got a little counseling. So this is some more things that y'all can do when you're down there. No telling what experiences we'll have. This is just to show you, I always take Hot Wheels cars and any little kind of McDonald's toys or things. And everybody that comes through clinic, really. And I always buy one piece of that orange Hot Wheels track, because they can be connected together. I get one piece of track and one car that I give each little boy, and then they can all sit around like those little troublemakers. They can all sit around and connect their track and play together while they're waiting for clinic, you know. But they love Hot Wheels cars, and I love little boys. All my children I adopted are sons, so I love little boys. Over at the house of these people that I know really well, I sponsor their child in the feeding program, and over at their house, I see this little boy. And I'm like, who is he? And it's like, well, that's the older brother's son. He was just 11 months old. So he's severely malnourished. So I told Mary, something has to be done for this child. So we managed to get him into the malnutrition recuperation center that they have there. It's a government program, and it's a really quite good program run by the government there. And so I went, because he was there, I went to visit him, and I got associated with them. And now, this last year, they let me visit every single day and work with the children. And I mostly work with the mothers who are stuck there with the children bored to death. So we did needlework, but one of the women said, oh, and I got some supplies for him. And one of the women said, but why do you do this for us? You don't even know us. So there was my opening, you know, and I was able to tell them why I love their children. And then I was also able to teach them a little child development stuff, you know, while we did our needlework and visited. This is the feeding program. That's what the missionary's main program she does is a feeding program, 5 days a week, 1 meal per day for malnourished children. And I think there's 80 malnourished children she serves, and then 40 elderly people. That's my friend Bernarda again, cooking that she puts at the feeding program. So this program, it supplies their nutritional needs, but also it gives employment for some of the local women. And it's run on sponsorship. That's how she does it. She solicits sponsors for the children that eat in the program. She also has one for school-age children for school too. The little girl in the very front is Bobby, the little girl I sponsor, and I've known her for 5 years now, and every year I go to her home and visit her, and that's her little sister in the back, and that's her aunt actually beside her. So you get to know the people. The sponsors get where they really, really care about them. I take presents every year just to my sponsored child, and I gave Bobby this doll. And if you can tell what she did when she got the doll, she immediately raised up her shirt and nursed her baby doll. What else would you do? Baby's hungry. This is just a scene in their home when they got their presents. This little boy, so that's that little aunt. The little girl in the middle is the aunt, and she has a sister, and her sister's older and married, and last year while I was at the house visiting my little Bobby, they all lived together like in a compound, crammed in. But anyway, this girl comes running in last year and she says, my baby's dying and my baby's dying, and it was a newborn, and she says, my baby's dying, he hasn't nursed in over 24 hours. And that really is life-threatening if a newborn doesn't nurse in over 24 hours. I mean, he was 3 or 4 weeks old. And they can die of dehydration. So I said, well, I'll come. So I went to the house, and his nose was stuffed up. So I went back to the village, and I went to a pharmacy, and I bought some saline nose drops and a bulb syringe, and I went back out and cured the baby instantly. Just cleaned his nose out, put him to the breast, and he nursed right then and there. And this is him a year later. It's so wonderful when you get to see a success now and then. These are the elderly people that eat in the feeding program, and every year Mary has a party for them. That's why we can't go on September 15th, because that's their party. And these people have almost never been out of the village, much less, you know, have a party. And Mary brings them to, that's Mary's house, and she brings them to her house, and the September 15th is Independence Day in Guatemala, and the parades go right down in front of Mary's house. So they come and they watch the parades. And they had some door prizes, and this is the chicken. Dorothea won the door prizes of the chicken, and so did Mariano. He won the chicken too, so those are the door prizes. Okay. I'm almost done. This is just at the school, the Independence Day festivities at the school. The little girl holding the turkey is a girl we know, and she was dancing in a typical dance. Guatemala is known for its textiles. If you go, you're going to want to bring home some beautiful textiles. I have them thrown over the back of my couch, thrown over my recliner, thrown over every table, you know. They're just beautiful, beautiful. Those belts, they wear the typical skirts. These are the skirt materials. They wear those skirts just wrapped around them. Then they're tied on the belt. And I've seen them making the belts. A lot of them make those belts in their home with a backstrap loom, and it's fun to watch. And this is just my cross-cultural picture. I really like it a lot. So Anna was listening to her iPod, and she made friends with this lady, so she took one of her earphones out, gave one earphone to the lady so they could listen to the same music together. And look at that. They might not speak the same language. Anna didn't even speak Spanish. They didn't speak any common language, but they communicated. And that's what it's all about. And that's my last picture. So if anybody has any questions, I could.
What does it cost to sponsor a child? Kind of give us that.
It's $25 per month to sponsor a child or an elderly person in the feeding program. And it's either $40 or $45 per month to sponsor a student in the student program. And then if you can, you don't have to, but it's really sweet if you can like send them a Christmas present or something like that. But certainly not required. But $25 a month is the feeding.
Well, I don't know about y'all, but just that night that Eileen and Mary came and started sharing, my mouth dropped to recognize the year that this genocide happened was 1982. That's yesterday. And so the opportunity to co-administer traumas and all that they have faced and the generational part of that through the years. So pray that into your hearts, and we'll get more information, and we'd love for you to be a part of this exciting upcoming trip.